Let the record indicate all board members are present, as is the superintendent, Haley Robinson, the clerk, Tanya Baker, and attorney, Scott Mullins. Let us now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Is there any change to the agenda?
No, sir, there is not.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda as approved?
I'll make that motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That brings us down to item number 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, board members. Just an update on the litigation and new elementary school project, and then we'll get into the discussion of the potential funding loss to FY21 budget. I'm going to ask Scott Mullins, our school board attorney, to please update us on the litigation and also the new school project.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, in a nutshell, we're meeting here today not by coincidence, but because we try to schedule our meetings immediately after the Board of Supervisors meetings because time is of the essence. And just to lay a little bit of historical foundation, both sides working through counsel, our counsel in Abingdon, theirs in Roanoke, have been working toward an agreement to resolve the litigation. And both attorneys are very capable, and they've wordsmithed this. And the document, though, is pretty concise and pretty simple. And at the last meeting of the school board, you passed that vote of 5-0 and authorized Dr. Lyle to sign it. And the agreement in its essence is pretty simple. It said that the school board would pick the location, the school board would have access to the money that the Corps of Engineers is holding, the $24.5 million, that construction accounts, those funds would be used for wetlands mitigation and the other things that are non-discretionary requirements in dealing with the Corps, but that any remaining funds would not be used for things that would be discretionary, like tennis sheds or visitors' restrooms. That money would be held until such time as we had the new elementary school constructed and the kids were in it. And so that was sort of that $1 million or so that we had in our construction accounts. We had to work that out a little bit, but not really a lot of controversy there. Something we could work through, and reasonable compromises were made. We agreed that they would get the money that was needed to pay the QSCAB bonds, which is the only remaining debt from our construction accounts, and that they would appropriate, and that's a term of art, but they feel like it's necessary for them to appropriate that money that we would get from the Corps of Engineers. And while we disagree with that, we feel like that we have the legal authority as a school board to contract with the Corps of Engineers without them doing anything more. We really weren't disagreeing with that. As long as ultimately we had access to the money, we were fine. And so it seemed like last time when we were here, there were two issues that were separating us. And one was the $600,000 that was attributable to credits that were taken from the school system's budget to be applied to the HASAP project And after that happened, we learned that the Hayside project would not need to make a 5% match, so those, we thought those credits should come back to the school system. And the wetlands mitigation, which is around $250,000, but very time-sensitive work that had to be done. Last night, yesterday, the Board of Supervisors convened a closed meeting, and they came out and they approved in a resolution the use of the 202 credits of $600,000 would come back to us, and that we would have up to $250,000 to do wetlands mitigation. And I was actually listening on the computer when they came out, and I thought this case was settled. And then this morning, I was anxious to see the agreement, make sure all the paperwork's in place, and suddenly it became clear that we had veered away from each other in our approach to resolving this case. The parties up until last night had been working toward an agreement. And to make sure we're communicating, there's a difference between an agreement and a resolution. An agreement is where parties sit down, they put the main provisions, the things that they agree to be bound by in writing, and they read those things, they're important, the contract's important, and both sides sign it. And there's nothing novel about that. I mean, we do agreements every day, but in order to bind parties down to a resolution that have differences, the way you do that, or the way you go about that, is to sign an agreement. What they did last night was pass a resolution. Now, boards speak through their resolutions, and resolutions are important. When you pass a resolution, it gives the public direction on what you're thinking as a collective unit, as a board, not any one individual. So resolutions are important, but resolutions can change. You can resolve to do A today, and at the next meeting, change your mind and resolve to do B, and at the next meeting, change your mind and resolve to do C. So resolutions are not binding. Agreements are binding. And so what I think I've consistently said, and what I thought we were working toward, is that for us to go forward and enter into a contract, a multi-million-dollar contract, we need to know where we stand, and we need to know that there are no obstacles in our way that keep us from complying with the terms of a contract. And so I'm not sure, and I'm not being coy when I say that, because no one, I'm not included on a lot of the correspondence. The communications is not between me and Mr. Phillips. It's going on at a level that I guess is to you as individuals. You probably know more about this than I do. But at the end of the day, if we're going to go forward and build this school, both sides need to know where they stand. And actually, three sides need to know where they stand, because the IDA is a party to this too. And, but we all need to sit down and have a really simple, straightforward agreement that we all agree to be bound by, and we sign off on it. And from a legal perspective, just passing resolutions saying you agree to do this today, that's informative, that's helpful, that's something we can look at. But ultimately, the whole idea here is to do a deal, to finalize this thing with a written agreement. And so until we get to that point, we're just talking to each other. That's all that's happening. There's nothing final until you have a written agreement that you can submit with a final order to the court and finish this. This should come as no surprise to anyone that we've been working to get an agreement to put this behind us. So to go back and forth and with just resolutions is, it's not a waste of time, but it's certainly not, it's not the end product. We've got to sit down have a 4 or 5 page agreement, have all the 3 boards vote on it in open session so we know where we stand and we move on to the next chapter. So we'll talk more about the litigation in closed session. I saw last night, in spite of the complaints I have about not finalizing, I saw last night's movement as positive. So there are reasons to be hopeful about this. But the difference, the thing that I want you and the public to know is that when they act, the next day we're here. And if they act again, we'll call a special meeting because the next day we'll be here. Because every day that we don't do something, it's $1,700. $1,700 every day when you divide the 85,000 out. And we've been doing that since November of 2018. And so it's time to get to the bottom line and get a deal. And so that's what I want. That's what I advocate for. And quite frankly, I don't think we're that far apart. But it's just time to close this thing and do it. So I'll try to answer any questions, or if you know something that perhaps I don't know, then I'm ready to be informed. And again, we'll talk about this more in closed session and perhaps come out with a resolution to deal with this. That's all I have.
Thank you. Hearing no other questions or comments,
I will make a comment. For me, it's just part of this is difficult to talk about agreements that are binding, and I don't know what I'm missing on this, but how binding is any of our agreements. We had an agreement that was binding prior to any of this, and so now it seems like we're trying to say, well, we're going to have a new agreement, and that will be binding, but the last one wasn't. So that to me, it's difficult it's frustrating to understand.
What was the agreement you're referring to before?
The original contract, the facilities development agreement.
Well, I'm more concerned about what I have in my time here, and there's been no agreement made since I have been on this board that I'm aware of.
I was just referencing the language of binding, so we're going to have a binding agreement.
I clearly understand what our attorney's saying. He's protecting the school board. And this has to be in place, or we don't have anything to stand on under the current situation. We have to be on a firm foundation here, and I don't see much difference here between the two groups, frankly.
I don't think there's a lot of difference either, and I think that there's 3, maybe 4 sets of perspectives. There's our perspective, and there's the Board of Supervisors' perspective, and there's the public's perspective about, are we all doing what we should be doing to get this behind us. And those are important, but the one that I have to focus on is if you are a contractor and you're going to spend millions of dollars to come up here and do a project, what you want to know is that all of this hoopla is over. All this drama is behind us. You want to know that we've sat down, as adults should, and put together in plain English an agreement on how we're moving forward. Not that we're just resoluting back and forth, resolution here, resolution there. So that's my focus. Mr. Hackney's point is well taken, that agreements are always subject to interpretation, and that's why we have good attorneys that try to say things in ways that aren't subject to interpretation. But ultimately, if we weren't working toward an agreement to get this resolved, I wish someone would have told me that 4 months ago, because we've wasted a lot of time trying to get there.
Well, the only thing I was referencing was that there have been votes taken before, and nothing came to fruition from those. And there's been much done in the past, but we are where we are today, and we have to move from today to tomorrow.
Well, you all have different perspectives on this. The public elected you, not Scott Mullins. But all I'm saying to you is this. Apparently the only lines of communication that are working right now are you with your counterpoint parts. So I want you to understand from a legal perspective what I feel like we need to achieve. And I encourage you to work with your counterparts on the Board of Supervisors and get us over the hump, because we're close. We've never been closer than we are now. We just need to bridge this gap and get it done.
Right.
What did they say in terms of what we passed unanimously last week? Can you make any suggestion into what the difference is at this point with what they did last night?
This is the thing that I hate to admit, but no one has spoken to me. I have not spoken to an attorney about this in months. All this is drafted through the council and from Abingdon and Roanoke. And I have said, I think consistently, that this is a bad way for us to go about resolving our differences. I have no idea. I got this resolution this morning, so I've seen it. Typically, what we try to do is when we bring you something, we try to share it with the attorneys for the other side so we can grind off any problems. It's hopefully something that the other side can work with. So I am, as I get them, and trying to give you advice about what I'm getting. But like this afternoon, I think all of you got an email. I'm not on loop. So the communications that you're getting, I'm excluded from those. So, I'm trusting you all to tell me what's going on. But we'll get through this. I mean, this is what we do. It's been a painful experience all the way through, but we're close now. And so I, again, encourage you to talk with your counterparts, and let's knock this thing out and get it done.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Mullins? Okay. If not, then we'll look at our second agenda item, which is the discussion of potential funding issue to the FY21 budget. Last Wednesday, when we met and learned of the $600,000 reduction in local appropriations, you requested that we begin to consider possible options to address the budget deficit with the additional loss in state funds, which was a total amount of $998,305. A couple of you have made some suggestions, and we've included those options for your consideration. In just a few moments, Mr. Barton will come and present these options to you. First of all, I want to share with you that the school board will not be asked to make any decision tonight. The goal for tonight's meeting is only to discuss and consider these potential options and their savings. The difficult decisions for the school board will come in the next couple of weeks. But for the record, I just would like to make some comments regarding this process. One common theme that we heard from the former members of the Board of Supervisors and from some newly elected members during their election campaign was their unwavering support for the 3 elementary school model. Again and again, we heard that the county should and would support the 3 elementary school model. And with these budget cuts of $1.1 million from last year, this is certainly not a reality today, but certainly a myth. Since last year, the school division budget has decreased $1.1 million. Actions speak louder than words, and the words of the Board of Supervisors and the $600,000 reduction in the budget is very clear. They cannot, they will not support the 3 elementary school. When we began the budget process in November of 2019, our goal was to be good stewards of the local appropriations, with the support of the Board of Supervisors that had given us last year in revision of the salary scales for the first time in 10 years. Our local request, which you approved in March 2020, was $6.5 million, or $500,000 less than last year's. As you know, since March of 2020, the school division has requested to meet with the Board of Supervisors on numerous occasions to discuss the FY21 budget. In April 2020, we received notification that the state budget was cut $398,000 due to COVID. We immediately informed the Board of Supervisors of the state budget cuts and the local appropriations requests, and that the local appropriation request would not be increased to meet the state budget deficit. Again, we sincerely wanted to demonstrate good faith efforts to work with the Board of Supervisors and to address the budget shortfall. When we again requested a meeting, we received an email from the county administrator on April the 22nd stating that the budgeting process was ongoing, but the appropriation request for the school division remained at 6.5. And it wasn't until May the 11th, a week ago, that we were informed of the $600,000 budget cut. I wish I had the words to tell you, but this news is devastating. It's devastating for you. It's devastating to our staff. It's devastating for our school division. To be informed 3 weeks before the end of school and during the COVID-19 crisis that the school division is facing a local budget deficit and state budget cut of nearly $1 million is just really surreal. Before the Board of Supervisors meeting last night, I was hopeful. We had heard that there appeared to be support for an additional $200,000. We had calculated that if we received any additional funding from the Board of Supervisors, such as $200,000, we tighten up our spending between now and June 30th to carry over additional funds into next year. Some of the difficult decisions that we're going to have to be discussing today would not be considered. I attended the Board of Supervisors meeting, and I spoke during public comment requesting additional funding and shared with them the $1.2 million CARES Act funding that the county is receiving and how it may assist the Board of Supervisors in funding additional funding for the school division, specifically in the areas of technology, infrastructure, purchase of devices, and perhaps a professional development cost to train our staff and faculty for virtual learning for the school division. The guidelines for the expenditures are stringent, and the money has to be expended by December 31st, 2020. Instead of a reimbursable process, which is what the school board has to have, the Board of Supervisors will receive $600,000 in June and an additional funding of $600,000 later in the year. We offer to assist the county in any possible way that we could. During the meeting, the county administrator informed the Board of Supervisors that they had 3 pots of available funding. One was the discretionary fund of approximately $2.5 to $3 million from the $5.5 million, which was discussed in late 2019 in the Dixon Star by the county administrator. An insurance fund of $800,000 that has $300,000 available funds, and the debt service to the Judicial Center, which has annual payments for the next 20-plus years. The treasurer reported that real estate taxes due on June the 5th, 2020 were coming in very strong, stronger than anticipated, and that they felt that the contributing factor may be the stimulus checks that our citizens had received. At the end of the meeting, the Board of Supervisors had taken no action to reconsider the school appropriations. The options that Mr. Barton will discuss with you are very difficult. They are not my recommendations, but the possible options for the board to consider. One of the options is the closure of Irvington Elementary School. Another option is increasing health insurance premiums for our employees and the removal of the 1% salary step increase. On a personal note, Any of these options considerations are difficult at any time. We know that from prior challenging budget years, our children are the ones that are significantly impacted. Our staff lose their jobs. A series of domino changes will need to take place, affecting many. But any consideration of these options during the COVID-19 appears to be more focused, more significant, and to many more hurtful. When there is so much unknown and heightened anxiety for our students whose lives have been so disrupted, our families and our staff, any consideration of these options appears to be unnecessary. At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Barton to come to the front.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson, members of the board. Right now, Ms. Robinson's handing out a copy of what we're going to be kind of going through tonight. And as we go through this, just stop me, ask any questions that you got, and we'll talk through it. But if everybody's got a copy, at the top, we're starting out kind of the yellow shaded area. We're looking at what our state budget cut was, and we refer to it as the state budget cut. This is the amount that appeared on the April 29th entitlement sheet from the state. We were reduced $398,305 after the COVID-19 crisis. And then the local budget cut is $600,000. So the amount we're looking, the total cut to revenues from our budget, which you guys approved on March 25th, is $998,305. The next area here, the shaded blue areas, are going to be things that we are working on and kind of have already done. Is first off, our carryover funds from fiscal year 20, our current year. This is estimated, and as Ms. Robinson said, we're trying to tighten our belt and hopeful any money that we can carry into next year will help us with the budget situation into fiscal year 21. My estimate is still at $151,000. Once we get our actual May revenues posted, final through the end of the month, and look at all of our May expenditures, I'll update that again with my June estimates and see where we're at with that. The next line item, and I mentioned it last week, was the additional cost of unemployment we're going to have to add to the fiscal year 21 budget. It's estimated at about $45,000 right now. We had about $5,000 budgeted into our budget, and so far to date, we're up to about $45,000 in additional claims that we'll have to pay out in fiscal year 21. The next line item, other net reductions to budget. This has been a lot of ups and downs in the budget. I've went through each line item. There's some things we've had to increase due to anticipated changes, and then some decreases. Right now, we're at a net of about $30,217 savings on those items. We talked last week about the additional 1% raise. The original state budget that went through conference had 2% in year one, which was fiscal year 21, and a 2% raise for all SOQ and instructional positions in year two. That got changed to 2% over the biennium. So our steps equate to right about 1%. I think this year's 1.06%. So we were removing the additional 1% to be in compliance with state. So that's $155,905. We set some money aside hoping to look at the coaching salary scales to hopefully revise those. It was $22,000, and we're kind of putting that on back burner right now. Since the budget was passed in March by our board, we became aware of one teacher retirement coming up. We're going to save about $9,800 from that, so we have to take that into account. And lastly, minimum wage, the law changed on that. It does not go into effect until May 1st, 2021 instead of January 1st, 2021. That's an additional $34,935. So after we get down those items in blue, the amount we still need to reduce our budget by is $639,426. Does anybody have any questions up to this point where we're at?
When you say remove the additional 1% raise, that would still keep the step raise?
That would still keep the step in, yes. And we've got an option down below. We'll look at that step about what to do with it. So the next section is some board recommended options. Some of these, I've got some were mentioned in the meeting and some come through since the last meeting, but one option was removing the salary step. As Mr. Hackney just mentioned, we had two things in. We had a salary step. You know, last year, salary committee worked hard on getting steps moving. They've been frozen for about 10 years. Board of Supervisors participated in this committee. We had a couple members from Board of Supervisors, school board members, county administrator. The whole staff was represented well, but we're looking at, you know, save $165,259 if we did not give that step. Now, if we don't give the step in fiscal year 21, in fiscal year 22, we'll have to give 2 steps in order to get the state funding, the 2% that's coming from the state for that, because the 2% has to be given over the biennium, but the money doesn't come until fiscal year 22. I was asked to look at the number of coaching positions that we had, some suggestions there as far as looking at each sport, how many coaches there was. That would be about 25,908 if we made some reductions there. I was asked to look at a 30% increase in employee health insurance premiums. That would equate to $86,040 in savings. I kind of footnoted that would increase the employee-only rate by $15, employee plus one by 20, and family by 30. Also, I was asked to look at the bus drivers as far as, you know, right now bus drivers hired after July 1st, 2012 are only eligible for employee-only insurance. Those hired prior to that date were also eligible for family coverage. If all drivers were only eligible for employee-only coverage, that would be a $281,160 savings. And lastly, if we eliminated the purchase of one bus, it would be $95,000. We're budgeted for 2 buses right now. If we eliminated the purchase of one bus, that would be $95,000 savings. Again, these are just some options we're looking at. We don't have to make any decisions tonight. We're just sharing this information with you. But does anybody have any questions on that section, the board recommended options? Okay. The bottom section shaded in green are just some other considerations. As Ms. Robinson said, the first one there on the list is the option we looked at if Irvington Elementary were to be closed. In looking at this option, it would be a savings of $576,556 estimated. You can see I've got 2 columns on the right-hand side, the positions that would be reduced through attrition and positions that would be reduced through reduction in force. The assumption on this here was that all teachers and instructional aides would follow the students to whichever school they went to, Sand Lick or Clintwood, that we would retain all teachers and all instructional aides. The other positions that are lost would be, you know, as administration bumps down, secretaries, nurses, custodial, cafeteria, all the other positions, as people bump around, ultimately somebody gets bumped out. But that'd be 2 full-time positions through attrition, 4 full-time and 6 part-time through reduction in force. So again, that's $576,556. Also looking at, we have a retirement, a bus driver. We're looking at if we consolidated that bus run due to retirement. We got with Mr. Mooney on this. It would be 1 position reduced through attrition, $50,398 savings. Mr. Mooney also indicated there may be another existing run that could be consolidated, savings of $30,627. Be 1 full-time position lost through reduction in force. Lastly, we reviewed all of the part-time folks, the aides at the elementary school level, how many we had at each school and where they worked. If 8 part-time positions were reduced, it would save $65,882. Again, these are all just options. These are some things that you all had shared with us to look at, some other items that we looked at as a group. There's still other things that we're looking at. This isn't an all-inclusive list of all the options. There's other options we're looking at, considering, trying to see what the effect of them would be and what the savings could be with them. So, you know, as we move forward, there will be more things that come up. You all will have more questions, possibly more ideas you want me to look at. Feel free to share them with us. So.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Robinson or Mr. Martin? If not, then it's time to move down to Schedule 4, closed session. Is there anyone, I'll ask again, anyone have any questions before we go to closed session?
Dr. Lyle, I just would like to say that all of these options are very difficult. They're not recommendations that you would like to have or that I would like to have. The bottom line is that we have a budget deficit. And as indicated in a letter that I wrote to the Board of Supervisors Sunday evening, it takes money to educate our children. You can see it on paper and think one thing, but certainly when you see it in action, it's something else. Dixon County Public Schools has not reached the goals that it has reached. Its children are not exceeding at the height and depth that they're achieving. Our staff are not performing at the level that they're performing without money and funding. And so this budget cut is detrimental. It's devastating. It's devastating for you, and it's devastating for all of us.
Mr. Chairman, I think that maybe after we have a little time to absorb this and think about it, we may have a question when we come back, if that would be appropriate.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yes, sir, it would.
This is a lot of tough information to absorb, kind of.
It is. It is. And we have just really about 3 o'clock today is when we have finalized some of this information. Our staff has been working on this pretty much nonstop since last week. And so, yes, sir, anytime that you have any questions, we certainly would like to discuss it.
And did I understand we're not taking action on any of this tonight?
No, sir, there is no action at all
Right.
on
So
this. This is just discussion item for the board to consider, and then certainly direction from the board as to how to proceed.
So there will be time for discussion and questions later on.
Mr. Barton, what is the annual inflation rate normally?
Normally around 2%.
About 2%. I went back and looked at some numbers, local contributions since 2008, and from 2008 to 2020, we basically looked at the increase in local funding of 2.8%. So,
Over that
so we've
period.
kind of been saving money for about 12 years.
Right. Good point.
That's an excellent point, thank you.
If no other discussion for this, pursuant to section 2.2-3711, paragraph A of the Code of Virginia, I move the board convene a closed session to consult with legal counsel and receive briefings by staff members pertaining to actual litigation with the Board of Supervisors and the IDA regarding the location of the proposed new elementary school pursuant to Virginia Code section 2.2-3711A7.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.